All right, so this video is going over, for Elise, page 3, starting on the 1, 2, 3, fourth line, last measure. We're going to go over the left hand first and what the notes are, and then go over the right hand. So the left hand notes on that last measure of the 1, 2, 3, fourth line are 6 A's, 1 and 2 and 3 and. Then another measure of the same thing, 1 and 2 and 3 and. Another measure, 1 and 2 and 3 and. Another measure, 1 and 2 and 3 and. Another measure, 1 and 2 and 3 and. And that brings us to the last measure of the second to the last line. And now we add D with our 5 finger to that A. 1 and 2 and 3 and. Now we're on the first measure of the last line. That goes to D sharp and A. 4 finger on D sharp, thumb on A. 1 and 2 and 3 and. And on this next measure, the second measure of the last line, we drag the 4 finger up to E, keep the thumb on A, and do it only 2 beats worth, 4 times. 1 and 2 and. And then we have 1 beat of eighth notes, that's 2 of them, where we play E with your 4 and 2 on G sharp. And that's 3 and, only twice. And then 1 time we hit octave A's. That's on 1, and then and 2 and 3 and. And that's where we're stopping. We're stopping on the third measure of the last line. So I'm going to play the left hand now without all the verbal description. 1 and 2 and 3 and. 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 One more. 1 and 2 and 3 and. 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 That's the left hand. Now for the right hand. The right hand ends its phrase from before, and that A is the last measure of the fourth line where we started the left hand. Then on the first measure of the second to the last line of page 3, we have a diminished seventh chord, E, G, B flat, and C sharp, played with 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's a whole measure, 1 and 2 and 3 and. And then we have thumb on F, 2 on A, 5 on D. 1, 2. And then we have 2 and 4 on C sharp and E. And then that's an eighth note. And then another eighth note, D and F. That's the end of that second measure of that second to the last line. And now the third measure starts with those same 2 notes, D and F, but we add thumb on G sharp underneath. 1, 2, and then you hit that same chord on beat 3. Now the next measure, the fourth measure of that line, is A minor, ACE. I would probably play it 1, 2, and 4 because it's more graceful to get to it that way from the diminished seventh chord we just played. But in whatever fingers you use, it's A, C, and D. And that's a whole measure, 1 and 2 and 3 and. Then the last measure of that second to the last line, it's just a sixth. Thumb on F, 5 on D. That lasts for 2 beats, 1 and 2 and. And on beat 3, you move to E and C. And on the end of 3, you move to D and B. And then so that finishes out that line. Now we're on the last line. You slide down again to C and A, but you add an F sharp in the middle, 1, 3, and 5. Thumb on C, 3 on F sharp, 5 on A. And that's for 2 beats. And on beat 3, you play the C and A again without the F sharp. And then you repeat those 2 notes on beat 1 of the next measure, or the second measure. And then up a third with that sixth to E and C. Down a second to D and B, and down a second to C and A. And that is the third measure of that last line on page 3, and that is where we're stopping. So here's how that sounds without all the verbal description. So coming into and 3 and 1 and 2 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 and 3 and 1